Larry Fink is here. He's chairman and CEO of BlackRock. The financial services company is the world's largest asset manager. It oversees more than $4.6 trillion. Clients include individuals, governments, pension funds, and other global institutions. BlackRock owns more shares in more American companies than any other party. For all those reasons, plus, I'm pleased to have Larry Fink back at this table. Welcome.
Thank you, Charlie. How are you?
I'm good. And interested to talk to you at this moment. So just give me a sense of where you see things today in terms of the global economy, in terms of markets, in terms of what factors are influencing them, like the price of oil, like deflation, like whatever.
Well, as you framed the world,
Yes.
you framed a divergent world.
Right.
The world is a very divergent place. We have cross currents. We have political issues that are impacting us that we've never even dreamed of 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even 2 years ago. And we have an uncertain economy worldwide. We still have the middle class, having witnessed huge market movements upward and seeing real wealth creation for some. We have seen stagnation in so many parts of the world. Now, this is just part of the equalization of the world. It's hard in any one country to talk about that equalization process. But at the same time, I talk about this divergent world. Over the last 10 years, we've had the biggest rise in middle class income worldwide in man's history. So a lot of good things are happening. And I think what right now...
Most of that was China?
No, it's China. It was Brazil. It's Mexico.
Right.
It's
emerging
Turkey.
markets. Emerging markets.
Yeah.
Right.
But so if you were listening to the news, you would be confused about all the good things going on because the dominance is all this divergence, and the divergence is going to be with us. And so we have to overcome some of the negativity and focus on some of the other things that are going on, and some of the things are quite strong. So where the world is today, the world is improving. The U.S. economy is going to grow a little faster than last year. Probably a little weaker in the first quarter because of the energy change.
So that'll put it right around 3%?
No, lower, probably 2.8.
2.8, okay.
2.7. Europe is going to be incrementally better than last year because they finally fixed their banking crisis. They have benefited by a very weakened euro, and they're benefiting by a very accommodative central bank. And so you're starting to see a modest improvement in the European economy. And then you have economies like India with a new government, with Modi, who I happened to visit a few weeks ago. You have an economy that was stagnating around 5-ish% a year ago, and now they are going to receive the benefit of this lower oil price. That's going to add at least 1% of GDP to India alone. The reforms that Prime Minister Modi is focusing on will most probably add 1 or 2 more percent of GDP. So you could see in India going from a 5% economy to an 8%. Now, India is 1/3 the economy of China. China is going through a modest reduction in GDP. If you remember, 5 years ago it was growing at 10%. Now it's hovering around 7%. Probably going to grow slower this year, but China may grow at 6.8 this year, so another reduction of 0.2 to 6.10. But the upswing of India will overcome all the weakness in China.
Because it will produce demand? Or why? Well,
just because China and India are both big importers of crude, big importers of natural gas. By alone, the commodity cost is down so much they're able to now produce more. The consumers who are buying all the kerosene and all the oil are going to be able to benefit. They're going to be able to spend more. So this is always a good thing. But the most remarkable thing that I think about the world is how technology is in front of our faces. We talk about it. I think the last time I was here, I was talking about the benefits of the United States because of energy. And the United States was creating 1 million barrels incrementally above where they were 2 years ago, and probably 2 million barrels incrementally over the last few years. And this was in front of us, and yet oil was staying at $100, and it was being tested in early 2014. We had ISIS, we had the uncertainty around Iraq, we had many issues, and yet oil did not spike upward. And then we had the IMF talk about global growth slowing modestly, and you had the breakage of oil. Now, the reason why I found this to be so remarkable, the change in the oil market is all driven by technology. And we talk about technology in so many other areas, whether it's social media or other things. We spend too little time focusing on how technology is changing our everyday economy, like gasoline, or how it's changing everything. And I look at this as transformational. This is going to be, this new technology, and the cost of the new technology is going to create a permanent reduction in the cost of petroleum products. Now, can oil go back from where it is around 50 to back to 70 or 80? Sure. But I don't think you're going to see it back at 100. And, Mexico is focusing on their reforms now. 1 or 2 years out, they are going to be beginning their hydraulic fracking, and their energy reforms are going to produce more oil. So we're going to see more and more oil being produced. So unlike all the other oil shocks that we've witnessed in our lifetimes, most oil shocks were demand-driven. This is an oil shock that was supply-driven, and the supply was created by new technology. And our theme is about how technology is going to be changing everything we touch, whether it's our sharing economy. I believe there's so much focus on companies like Uber, how it may change the taxi industry. I think, Charlie, that Uber may change car ownership. So if you live in New York City or you live in San Francisco, for those people, they don't really need to own a car anymore. When you buy a car, it depreciates the day you bought it. You have to pay for maintenance. You have to pay for storage. And if you have some form of sharing, and this is a really remarkable transformation in society, I think the millennials are not so wrapped up like I was as a young kid to own a car. And I think now the whole concept of sharing a car, whether it is an Uber or something different in 5 years, this whole sharing concept. And it started with sharing music on the internet. Then we started sharing our hard drive, calling the cloud.
Yes.
And so, we're just expanding this whole concept of sharing. And now it's touching the consumer, really importantly. And so these are transformational items. And one of the dynamics is why I'm still and remain steadfastly bullish on the United States. These technologies are all being created in this country.
How are they effective in manufacturing? And what are the... some worry about...
displacement of jobs?
Exactly.
No question. We are seeing a displacement of jobs because so many mechanized jobs jobs are becoming mechanized. I think for educated economies like the United States, we're going to, in the next 10 years, be a big beneficiary of that too. My worry about jobs in the next 10 years is it's going to have a bigger impact in these rising population economies that are just beginning to find a route towards middle class. These economies have been based, and if you talk about the emerging market, most emerging markets were based, their economy growth was based on cheap labor. Even in China today, China was the largest purchaser of robotics of any country in the world. China's wages have gone up considerably. As we talked about, their middle class has grown dramatically there. China, to remain competitive now, has to start having more efficient factories, which mean less human labor, which means more mechanistic processes. And so I believe the manufacturing process worldwide is going to change. But the engine of this ingenuity is in the United States, and over a long cycle, not in a short cycle. We'll have displacement in the short time. In the long cycle, we're going to be creating more and more men and women who have the ability to deal with this technology, to deal with
more leisure time.
We're going to need more people working on leisure time, helping people for leisure time. As we have an aging population, which I've talked about the longevity, we're going to need more people helping the aged. So I over a long cycle, I'm not worried about the short-term displacement that technology does. In this country, I'm more worried about displacement than in other countries. But nevertheless, for those men and women who are being displaced right now, I mean, it's a very worrisome, troublesome period of their lives. And in some instances, it's very difficult to get another job. Now, if you look at the labor statistics in the last two announcements by labor related to our unemployment rate, actually unemployment rates for the high school graduate only has come down over 2 percentage points. So the unemployment rate is still too high at 8.5%. But in 2008, 9, 10, we were hovering at 12%. So we've seen a dramatic decline in unemployment for the high school graduate. And if you even look at the breaking up by ethnic group, we're seeing a dramatic decline in unemployment for African Americans and Hispanics.
Lots of presidential candidates will make their way to your doorstop in order to both seek your advice as well as ask for support. Most of those candidates are trying to articulate a theory of the case as about the middle class, about income inequality, about how to make the economy more robust. Mm-hmm. And what do you tell them? What is your own theory of what ought to be the best prescription for America that resonates to those questions?
Well, unfortunately, it's time and education.
Yeah.
And that's time and education are long-term solutions. Short-term solutions, it's creating a more dynamic,
get better education.
Yeah, but also time. And as we saw, I mean, there were many more people unemployed 2 years ago than we have now. Right. So what I'm saying is time. I actually think we're going to see wage inflation later this year. I think the statistics tell me it's harder to find educated young workers in the job market today, and that's why it's now filtering down. We're reaching lower in training. That's what the markets tell me today, and I think that's going to start showing up possibly later this year, definitely next year, that we're going to start seeing wage inflation, and then that wage inflation is going to start lifting everybody up. We've already seen 23 states that raised minimum wage. I don't know if that number is correct, but I think that's approximately right. You're starting to see companies volunteer to raise minimum wage when they have a lot of workers. So I think it's happening. But the statistics do borne out. The top 1% have benefited mightily more than the other parts of our society.
So what are you prescribing we do? I mean, you just described things that are happening as a matter of course in terms of wage inflation, dipping down deeper in terms of people and retraining them.
Yes.
What does the government need to do? What does the private sector need to do?
I think President Obama, his proposal
need tax reform? Do we need...
What? President Obama has proposed free education in the community schools. Right. There is a start. If that is approved and that it happens, to me, that's a very powerful beginning. Right. That's a long-term trend to re-educate and to retool. I'm a big believer in tax reform. I believe we need to make sure that this is a nation where everybody wants to come. Getting back to my statement about the mechanization of manufacturing, we have fewer workers today. The positive side about what's going on now, labor represents a smaller component of unit costs in the manufacturing side. We are now seeing more companies bringing back manufacturing and onshoring again than we've seen in tens of years. And
what's causing that? The labor that don't have the same labor costs they've had before? Labor represents a smaller component of the overall cost of manufacturing because we've mechanized it so much that we have fewer workers on the factory lines. And so could we afford to spend $5, $10 an hour more than another country on our labor? Because that will be that will be a little higher on that component cost, but we won't have the transportation cost of shipping something from China or Korea or Indonesia here. Secondarily, you have one advantage the United States that no other Western economy has. We have the cheapest natural gas of any nation in the world. So if you're a manufacturer that depends on all the forms of natural gas from plastics to fertilizers, these are all derivatives of natural gas. And so our component costs are cheaper than what they would cost to manufacture the same item in Germany or even in Japan or China. So we have this big structural advantage
over every other manufacturer today.
What is the decline of oil prices to 52, I think it was today, and it may go up, you suggest, how far as
And it may go down to 30 before it goes up to 70, yeah.
What will decide that? Saudi Arabia?
No. The markets, the demand. Saudi Arabia, OPEC has less control of oil markets than they've ever had. They represent 30% of the market, of the overall market. You have to understand the market is priced to the last 2 million barrels, the last million barrels.
Right.
And it's that, so if we have incremental more demand or incremental more supply, that's going to change the overall price for the entire market. And that's what's going on. We have a supply imbalance. And that supply imbalance in the first 6 months of the year is actually greater than it was last year, because of all the wells that we started to build out last year are now on stream and then are producing. We're not producing as many new wells going forward, and that's going to impact oil prices in 2 years. Canada already spent huge sums of money in their oil sands. That they have 500,000 more barrels of oil this year than last year. And then you have Mexico, which a year or 2 years down the road will start seeing a real surge in production. So we see more supply. Now the key is, if we have more global demand for carbon, then we will find an equalization. And that equalization, from our long-term statistics, is probably $70 to $80. That doesn't mean it doesn't touch 30 for a moment, or it doesn't spike up around there. But we believe long-term value is probably $20 to $30 lower than it was for the last 5 years.
You believe the Keystone Pipeline is necessary?
It's certainly not necessary. It's a symbol today. In fact, one thing people don't talk about, the fact that we did not do Keystone, and I was not against doing Keystone when it originally was proposed, but the fact that we did not do Keystone, no one talks about it. We became more active in North Dakota in producing more oil. We became actually more self-reliant because we did not do Keystone. So Keystone...
So not doing Keystone had a positive impact?
Yes, and a very positive impact to the companies that transport, like all the train...
So why build it?
Well, the question I would raise... we've witnessed over the last few years some very horrific accidents with trains transporting oil. Now, if you want to talk about a risk, these oil tankers going through towns, don't you think a pipeline safer than, and environmentally putting all this oil in a tanker and going through all the countryside and towns? But I'm not going to get into a political debate. I did not understand why we vetoed it originally. To me, it's now more political. And do we need it today? No, but my big, strong view is North America is the best place to be in the world today. I'm talking about Mexico, Canada, the United States. The fact that we cannot create a regional cooperative energy system is a shame. And so Keystone became a symbol more than a fact. We are, Mexico is going to produce huge amount of pipelines. I don't hear any backlash on their proposed pipelines. Texas has many pipelines now because they're piping oil and natural gas to Mexico. This became a political symbol more than a fact.
U.S. growth. What would help U.S. growth? And first question is, if we see it at 2.8, can you imagine the GDP growth in the U.S. over the next 10 years reaching 4%?
Sure, easily.
Easily. Can I tell you how many people 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years, sat at this table, smart people, and said, I can't imagine U.S. GDP growth at 4%.
Because those same people probably could not imagine us becoming energy independent.
Yeah, exactly. So people talk about deflation.
Yes.
Tell me what they mean and what's I realize it's sort of the opposite of inflation, but what does it mean in terms of our economy today?
Inflation means stagnation more than anything else. I view, let's separate stagnation for a second. I believe we use too broad a word calling deflation because it means everything. I actually believe there's good deflation. You can't tell me oil prices at 52 versus 100 is not good deflation.
Right.
And so to me, what deflation represents for me, I don't want to talk about other people, it represents that it may mean stagnation, that we can't get out of this global poor performing economies. We look to Japan as a great example of 20 years of GDP plus or minus 1%. That's and that is the stagnation that everybody's...
in their last quarter come out of recession?
They actually had a very strong first part of last year. Then they raised their consumption tax, and then the economy fell over 5%. Last quarter, it grew 2.3%. So, and one of the big things about Abenomics, which has been successful, they have, for the first time in 20-something years, wages in Japan are up 2.5% this year. It is patriotic to raise people's salaries in Japan.
Yeah.
But so deflation is overly used. It means we're going to have a stagnant economy. And if we really had true deflation, that's really bad for financial markets, very bad for financial assets. Deflation is truly one of the worst outcomes of any economy, because it really just shows that we are regressing. This whole concept that we're trying to have our children have a better life than we will, that can never happen in a deflationary environment.
Do you have a theory of the market, or so that you look at companies, individual companies, and make decisions, or do you primarily look at a macro economy, or do you primarily look at what?
I spend all my time, because I'm not an investor, I manage investors.
Right.
I spend all my time focusing on the macro economies. I allow my investors to find what is the best stock within a sector, but I believe in the concept of factor investing, focusing on the big macro pictures and then translating that into individual stocks or individual asset allocations. One of the big reasons why ETFs are the fastest growing component of the capital markets is you don't have to be a stock picker, but you could have exposure. So if you believe that India is the place to be, you could buy an ETF just for Indian stocks. If you believe that pharmaceuticals are going to be the best place to invest, and you could buy an ETF just on pharmaceutical
Somebody else
stocks.
will pick the stock.
Well, no, you're buying the index.
Oh,
so you're buying the full index.
I got you.
And if you really understand the markets, which very few people do, but asset allocation probably represents 80% of performance. So unless you have a long-term horizon, picking great companies, and look at what like Warren Buffett has done. Warren Buffett has had a 40-plus, 50-year horizon of looking at companies, picking good leadership and companies that are in a good position. He's using top-down analysis of where to go. I mean, I think one of the most brilliant moves that Warren Buffett did, he believed that the U.S. economy was always strong. He's always advocating for a strong economy. And during the height of the financial recession of 2009, he buys Burlington Northern. Right. Now, he possibly could have said, well, I think more oil products would be transported in cars too. But he probably, so to me, if you don't have a long horizon like Warren Buffett, I do believe then you need to focus on being, investing more in indexes.
He just sold all of his Exxon holdings. Why would he do that?
I wouldn't know, but I assume to me, it's a bearish view on the oil markets.
On the oil market, that they're going to go down.
Once again, a top-down view.
Yeah. This is New York Times, what you've been talking about. China's economy is slowing. Brazil is struggling as their commodity prices plunge. Russia, facing Western sanctions and weak oil revenue, is headed into a recession. As other big developing markets stumble, India is emerging as one of the few hopes for global growth. The stock market and rupee are surging. Multinational companies are looking to expand their Indian operations or start new ones. The growth in India's economy, long a laggard, just matched China's pace in recent months. What you were just saying.
Once again, good leadership.
It's all because of Modi?
Good leadership.
Modi.
Good leadership. Great leadership who re-energizes hope. Mm-hmm. And we know psychology is so much a component of how we live our lives, when and how we spend our
Hope
money.
and confidence.
Hope and confidence.
Which is the same thing.
And that Modi has really given new hope to India. You have to understand, India is 148th in terms of being competitive in terms of ease of doing business.
Right. But he's going to change that.
When I saw the Prime Minister 2 weeks ago, he said, my hope to get it to 50. Now, we would not think being 50 is so good. If he could get it to 75 from 140, that's big. India has so much opportunity, but we've seen this story many times. We've had many times where we believed in India and we've been proven to be disappointed. This Prime Minister, who was very successful as a governor of a state of India, has organized an incredible leadership team around him. He brought in some of the smartest minds in India. He brought in people from the U.S. who were born and raised in India to come back. And so I came away with a group of people very confident in this government, and at BlackRock we expect to be providing our clients opportunities to invest in India.
Let's talk about Europe and Greece.
Well, the markets are pretty calm, and a lot of people are asking why are the markets calm about Greece. And this is a big macro issue that I haven't seen much on it, but Greece is not a private sector problem. In 2010, if Greece failed then, the private sector owned most of the Greek debt. Today, 70-ish% of the Greek debt is held by the ECB, Greek banks, they're all part of that, and then you have the IMF who has a huge loan outstanding to Greece. So it's not a private sector problem. As you think about what has transpired in the last 5 years after the Great Recession, we've had a transformation of debt being held by the private sector to an expansion of debt in the public sector. I mean, the Federal Reserve owns $4 trillion of bonds. You have the Bank of Japan buying all this. You have the ECB doing the QE. Right. And so now we're watching as these things play out.
Those moves by all those central banks?
I think we'd be in a much worse position today, but I do believe those moves made people who had money in the stock market wealthier, and that's the 1%er. So that unquestionably quantitative easing was very powerful for the wealthy, but it also had very big impact on the economy. But getting back to Greece for a second, it's a game of kabuki. Greece, in my mind, is part of the international grid. If you want to remain in the grid, you're going to have to ultimately conform. If they don't conform, they're going to become Argentina. Argentina was in the grid. They did things that the global economy said was wrong, and they have no access to capital outside the world.
Argentina can't borrow.
They cannot borrow. And if Greece walked away today, their banks would be bankrupt. Greece experienced a 26% decline in GDP from 2008 to now. That's almost equivalent to what we experienced in the 30s.
So that was from what to what?
08 to 13.
Oh, yeah.
If they walk away now, I think you would fall another ungodly amount of decline in their economy.
And when will they be out of the Eurozone?
It would be immediately if they walked away, and that's what I'm suggesting. I think this is just a game of kabuki.
So they're not going to make some amends for them and say...
I think Greece has a hard time meeting the obligation.
Away so far, aren't they?
Well, no, they haven't missed a debt payment yet. This is all being prepared.
So this is all just negotiating talk.
I would think they're going to try to find a way to extend their debt payments, extend their maturities, and so it looks like a win with a new government, but the Europeans can say we held steadfast. I don't worry about this type of noise because I do believe this, in most circumstances, will work out. Because I do believe common sense would mean if you're a government and you want to make sure the future of your country is better, walking away from the euro would not produce that outcome in the short run. Maybe in 10 years it would, but it would create a huge amount of pain for the Greek citizens. At the moment, I believe there's more than $1 billion, or there's a number, it's certainly more than $1 billion of money leaving Greece every day. So the wealthy people are taking their money out of there, and so it just the country becomes poorer and poorer and poorer and poorer.
I mentioned central banks. You like Mario Draghi, don't you?
I do. I think he is. I think he has one of the hardest jobs of any politician or regulator in the world.
Well, he came through in terms of confidence at a time they needed it.
He has proven to be quite resilient in terms of going against consensus, and even with there were some politicians who were against his positioning, he believed that he was the only. The ECB was the only entity that could stabilize Europe because the politicians of Europe did not have the political will.
So that was a huge confidence-building factor.
Absolutely, and you could see that across the board. Now, do I believe QE in Europe is going to be very powerful? No. I believe what he has done is an outright devaluation of the euro from 140, where it was before he began this, to 114 today. And that has helped competitiveness of Europe considerably. And this is why I think Europe is going to start seeing an uptick.
Okay, two big countries, one because of oil and sanctions, Iran and Russia.
Once again, Russia was part of the grid, and they're losing their connectivity to the world. I do believe.
And does that offer opportunities for investors or not?
You know, these are politicians. I don't believe in an investment strategy betting whether a politician performs admirably or performs aberrantly.
Yeah. You don't bet on the behavior of politicians.
I think there are other people better suited to that. I don't believe it's a good investment strategy. It's very binary, and it is binary, and you cannot control. I like outcomes where you have some knowledge. You can't control. You have no knowledge as to how Mr. Putin will perform on this. I do believe he miscalculated quite a bit related to the European response to his invasion or support.
Yeah, right. And then he got out front and he couldn't get back.
And I think that's the problem now. I believe what Chancellor Merkel did was very powerful with immediately flying to the United States. What was it? Last week or the week before, and seeing the president. I believe if the United States voted on bringing, providing weapons to the Ukrainians, I think then we just amped up the problem. I think we would respond pretty hostily if the Soviets or the Russians brought weapons closer to our shore. Yeah, I just don't think that's our responsibility. And I think Chancellor Merkel, when she came to I assume that's what the conversation was. Last week, yeah.
Let me move back to the United States. The Federal Reserve, we've got accustomed to Ben Bernanke during the financial crisis. Then he was succeeded by Janet Yellen. How's she doing, in your judgment?
I think she's done a great job.
Yeah. I think essentially the same policies that he might have.
If anything,
followed.
She might be biased more towards a tad more dovishness.
Yeah.
But I would say they're very similar. I think having Stan Fisher as a vice chairman, I think Stan might be a little more right of Janet. Yeah. So I think the complement of the two is very good. What I'm impressed by Janet Yellen, and I've been to a few meetings over the last 6 months with her, she is very forthright, unlike most chair people of the Fed. She is basically describing her views of the world, and she's very open about what she thinks where the world is going to go and the economic activity. And she said, if my view is right, we're going to do X. Mm-hmm. She said, but in the next 6 months, we're going to look at the data, and if my views are wrong, we may not do that. And so today, the Federal Reserve announced that they're now considering elongating their zero interest rate policy. And to me, and they cited international conditions, and they cited, the target inflation rate is not being met. The inflation rate is actually lower than their target, which gives them more time to do things. So my most important component about what Janet Yellen's doing, you should not be surprised at her actions. She has as much more openness Federal Reserve policy, and you have a pretty good understanding how she's navigating the Federal Reserve.
What is necessary to stimulate U.S. growth beyond what the Federal Reserve might do?
Well, a big change that we haven't spent enough time on in the last 2 years is state and local government finances are much improved.
Yeah.
You have states like Ohio that has a $2 billion surplus this year. I don't know why Ohio is not spending that $2 billion in infrastructure. They have some of the worst bridges in America. I mean, they could create so many wonderful jobs in Ohio to be additive to its economy. You even had state of California that had a surplus this year. So we're beginning to get our motion, we're starting to see the transmission of all the Federal Reserve activity. We're starting to see state and local governments who had very severe austerity programs in 2009 and 10, and those austerity programs brought down the expenses. And one of the big drags to the U.S. economy was we had rising employment in the private sector and declining employment in the public sector.
Right.
That has stabilized too. So many of these macro trends just take time to stabilize. So I actually believe we will see more elevated growth beyond my concern in the first quarter, and we will probably see 3 to 3.5% growth in the second half. The big issue in the first quarter that we didn't talk about, the consumer's not spending this $50 or $100 savings they're getting on the petroleum. So historically, they're saving it, and
right.
Every consumer brand company I talk to is saying they're not seeing the big impact on sales yet. Mm-hmm. But what I'm hearing is deposit rates are going up. The American consumer is saving more. It is our view that if the American consumer sees that these savings at the pump persist, and it's not just a $50 savings or a $100 savings a month, now they have $800 savings after 6 or 8 months, we will then see, and this is the reason why I think the third and fourth quarter will be better than consensus, because I do believe at that time the American consumer is going to say, I have a little more spending money. I also hope the American consumer who is now saving this $50 to $100 a month are thinking about putting some of this away for their retirement, getting back to our whole issue about longevity.
Okay. Whatever happened to all the concern about debt and deficit?
At the federal level?
Yes.
Well, we have
deficit hawks everywhere.
We have, and I was guilty of being somewhat of a deficit hawk, so I'm not totally innocent in that.
Meaning the performance of the economy.
The economy has done
surprised you, and you were wrong about fears.
Yeah, I probably was more an alarmist in 2011 that, we need to, or 2010, we really need to address some of this.
Right.
But the federal government did this. We had the sequester, which has some negative impacts. We have cut our spending rates dramatically. And last year, our federal deficit was down to $470 billion. 3 years ago it was $1.2 trillion. So we have now a lowering of our annual deficits, and we're having a rising economy. So as a percent of GDP, our debt to GDP is much lower than it was before. Right. So the problem is some of the reduction in spending that we've done in the United States will start accelerating again out in about 2020. And so we will have the same problem again, that we're going to have accelerated deficits if we don't find a way to navigate some of these long-term structural issues.
So the question is, what worries you? I mean, is it the unexpected, or is it something more specific?
Well, the biggest worry I have is when you read about getting back to my grid analogy, right. You have organizations like ISIS that's not on the grid, and that's why they're more frightening than anything around, because they want to destroy the grid. They don't want Western society as it is, and they're not funded. They're not linked to Western society. I mean, as bad of what you may think of Russia is linked. Their banking system is linked in this, internationally.
And Russian companies are doing business internationally, and American companies are investing.
And same with Greece.
Right.
And so if you want to persist in being part of the grid, you're going to have to find a way to conform to the grid. But when you have things like ISIS that are purposely trying to destroy Western society, that's probably the most frightening thing for me than anything that I can read today. Most of the stuff I read is a little more alarmist, and I don't think we're alarmed enough about.
What would that be?
Oh, I mean, we talk about cybersecurity.
Oh, sure.
I mean,
Right.
you see these things. They could, what happened if they shut down financial markets? They find a way. These are things that could change how we live our lives. The president last week was at Stanford University talking about cybersecurity with the private sector. I actually am more worried about cybersecurity at the state level. I don't believe our state governments are spending as much money as the private sector in protecting the information that they have. Keep in mind, most states in this country have a state income tax. Most states then collect Social Security numbers. Most states collect all the information where you live. That's the information that people are trying to get so they could find ways of attacking a financial statement of an individual. Well, we need to be rigorous and vigilant in making sure that as we get more connected to the web, whether it's state and local government, federal government, individually or corporation, we need to make sure that we have security and protection. When we talk about interconnectivity, we are, as a world, are becoming more interconnected through the internet, and we need to make sure that how we live our lives and how we live our everyday life is being protected.
All right. There's two things. One about your firm, but secondly, my last question about the overall picture. Leon Panetta, Bob Gates, lots of other people of respected intelligence have had high positions in government in the national security field have said time after time, the thing that worries me more than any other threat to America's national security is dysfunction in Washington. Now, is that alarming to you?
You know what? I'm almost numbed by how dysfunctional Washington is.
Yes.
So it's not alarming to me anymore because I'm numbed.
Oh, I got you. Yeah. Right.
I think this country would be so much better if we had a productive Washington. I think our economy would be growing at 4% today if we had a more productive Washington. If we had proper immigration policy and we had more, as I said, we're educating 800,000 students here, and most of them we kick out so they can compete with us. Right. They're going to get educated here, and they have a good history of being a good citizen. Why don't we leave and let them stay here? We don't have an infrastructure policy. We have the worst infrastructure policy in the world. I am focusing on infrastructure investing in India. I'm focused on infrastructure investing in Mexico and other countries worldwide. I just can't focus in the United States because it's so hard to get anything done. It takes years to go through federal, state, local authorities. And so one of the reasons why our infrastructure is falling apart, we don't have a federal government focus on these things. And so
because they're gridlocked between Republicans and Democrats.
The same thing with immigration policy.
Same about tax reform.
If we had tax reform, we'd even have more companies who want to come here.
Support for science and technology.
We could go on and on and on. So those are all fair statements, and as I said, we'd have at least 1% more GDP in this economy if we had.
At least 1% more GDP if there was not so much dysfunction.
If all the most obvious things that are necessary to make this country great were done, as I said, immigration, infrastructure, and tax reform, those three big things alone would be tremendous.
Of course, some people step forward and say, well, that's democracy, and that's what we like. That's the downside of democracy.
Well, I think
there's periods,
that I believe democracy
go to Washington and they behave this way.
I think there's periods of democracy when it's fabulously productive, and I think there's periods of time when democracy is fabulously unproductive. We are in that bottom trough right now, and we need to get back and having the men and women representing this country to build a better America. and I just don't believe they're focusing on America. I think they're just focusing way too much on their jobs, and it really leads to, do we need to have term limits? Do we need to do other things to, focusing on the right thing instead of preservation of their jobs?
Then finally, there's this. You have $4.6 trillion in assets under management. I said the largest anywhere. How did that happen? What did you guys do right? In other
I
words,
surrounded myself with really smart men and women.
Yeah.
We had a very simple business model.
Which was?
We are only going to be a fiduciary. We will not be in any business where we compete with our clients. We will not change and evolve into something we're not. We've been in business now 27 years. We remain what we were 27 years ago. We're only an asset management company. We do not have a balance sheet to compete with our clients. All our business is on behalf of our clients. All our revenues are from our clients. We don't, manage your own balance sheet. We don't have our own accounts. We believe that technology is going to be critical in risk management. So when we started the company in 1988, 25% of the founders had a technology risk management background. And we steadfastly always had a belief that risk management and technology are going to be critical. And today, we've been able to consistently build this platform to what it is today.
And what's the biggest mistake you've made in the process?
Oh, we've let down clients at times. We've been at times bad investors. We're not perfect, and the most important thing, we need to admit those problems. And there's times, it was public when I went to one of the state funds, when I went to the board and stood up and apologized to them.
You stood up and said, I made a mistake.
We made a mistake, and we let you down. No, I can't do that.
So what did they do in response?
They thanked me, and
continue to do business?
Yes, but not. Our business was reduced quite a bit. We were in the penalty box for a while. So you took your medicine, right? Yeah, I took the medicine. So I did not expect to have the same relationship after that. But most importantly, I would say overall, we have lived our responsibilities every day the same way. Importantly, we are driven by exceptional client service. I measure the share of my client's wallet and what percent of that wallet we are earning, and we're managing on their behalf. And I'm pleased to say, in almost the majority of cases, we are enjoying a larger share of our clients' wallets worldwide. We also believed in the globalization of the capital markets. So we believe that the world was a great place to invest in, and we're in 41 different countries where we have over $1 billion of assets on behalf of our clients.
In 41 separate countries, you have more than $1 billion in assets. You said this: we are maniacal about driving high performance, but we're also a family. Our clarity of purpose is crystal clear, has never changed and never will. What's the clarity of purpose?
To provide a better financial future for our clients. So, and to help them think about outcomes instead of most people are focusing too much in the noise in the newspaper, too much about what's happening today. And if they focus on your outcome,
and what the market is doing, the volatility of the market,
it's meaningless.
Yeah.
Okay, if you have a 30-year objective to have a pension fund, does it really matter what's happening in Greece or India today? No. And so you need to focus on your objectives. You need to focus on what you need. Now, if your focus is to earn enough money and save enough money to have a down payment on a house in the next 4 years, then that information in the newspaper is a little more important. And so then you design the strategy for that individual differently. If your purpose or outcome is your child's college education 18 years out, that's a different design. And so we're spending too little time on the moment, on the trade, not enough time on the solution. And I think we've done a very good job of trying to identify to more and more clients the solution.
We live in a political world. Define for me what you would consider the character and characteristics of a presidential candidate you would want to support.
Well, we talked about the gridlock in Washington.
Right.
We need a leader who can work the middle and build consensus and build a bipartisan Washington again. We need a true inspirational leader. We talked about Modi. India is a very fragmented political system, but people built this view on this one leader. The same thing in Mexico with President Peña Nieto.
And
we need a leader.
But he's, look at it, the same thing was with him. I mean, he's in trouble down there.
Peña Nieto.
Yes.
He's in trouble down there because of his administration's deafness related to security and crime.
Yeah, so they had the 43 children.
Mm-hmm.
And
their response.
And a little bit of corrections about corruption at the...
Yes, that's not been proven, but there's implications of corruption related to home purchases.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
And family stuff.
And yet, the economy grew 2.3% last quarter.
And he's announced significant reforms in the energy and telecommunications field.
And keep in mind, some of the most reform-minded leaders in the world generally don't have 2 terms. So, or their term is truncated. If you look at Schroeder in Germany, if you look at George H. Bush, 1 term.
Right.
But he set up this economy for the great opportunities that we had under Bill Clinton. Now, Bill Clinton's administration took it even further, but I do believe we can't look at Harry Truman.
Right.
You can't. Sometimes the most dynamic leaders end up being unpopular until the history books are written about them.
Truman's a good example of that. Yeah. So Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
You could support either of them.
Well, I'm a Democrat.
You're a conservative Democrat.
I'm a conservative. Yes, I am.
Centrist Democrat.
And let's leave it at that. I'm a conservative Democrat, but I've historically voted Democrat.
Yeah, you supported President Obama.
I did.
Does the fact that he couldn't do something about gridlock lie in part at his feet?
Well, I look at a president as a C.E.O. when I'm the one who's blamed when we do things poorly or we don't execute properly. The president takes the leadership role, whoever that president is in history, and their job is to make this country better. Now, the country is certainly better under President Obama where it was when he got here, because he got here in January 2009 in the midst of the biggest recession we had. So the economy has most certainly improved quite considerably.
We win 2 wars, but now we have a different challenge that might.
Well, we have huge challenges in front of us. But I'm sure the president, if he said he could have done things better. We do need now more than ever, as we talked about, immigration, taxation reform, infrastructure. We need, whoever that next leader is, to focus on these big picture items to transform this economy to be even greater.
And that requires a certain level of leadership skills, too, that you can ride the country behind you. And have them engage in your vision and be able to communicate with them, and at the same time operate within the structures of Washington to motivate and demand.
Or you have to speak to the people and have the people believe you, and then the politicians will follow.
Exactly. Thank you. Great to see you.
Charlie, thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Larry Fink for The Hour. See you next time. For more about this program and early episodes, visit us online at pbs.org and charlierose.com.